August 16, 1977. Graceland Mansion, Memphis, Tennessee. A security guard named Uncle Vester Presley finds his nephew collapsed on a bathroom floor. He starts chest compressions. His hands shake. His voice cracks, calling for help. Within minutes, Colonel Tom Parker arrives, not with comfort but with a command that would haunt this man for the rest of his life. Shut your mouth. You saw nothing. A king died that day. But the truth was buried with him. For decades, the real story of Elvis Presley's final moments was locked away, hidden, controlled, until the people who were there, the ones told to stay silent, finally broke. Here is the story. The summer of 1977 was suffocating in Memphis. The kind of heat that clings to your skin and makes breathing feel like work. Inside Graceland, the air conditioning hummed constantly, but it couldn't cool the tension that had been building for years. Elvis Presley was 42 years old. To the world, he was still the king. The man who changed music forever, who made girls scream and parents worry, who went from truck driver to global phenomenon in what felt like a heartbeat. But inside those mansion walls, behind the gates that kept the world out, Elvis was a ghost of himself. His body was failing. Years of prescription medication, uppers to perform, downers to sleep, painkillers to numb everything in between, had ravaged him. He was bloated, exhausted, struggling with every step. His face, once so impossibly handsome it hurt to look at him, was puffy and pale. His eyes, those magnetic blue eyes that had captivated millions, were clouded and distant. The people around him knew. His girlfriend, Ginger Alden, knew. His personal physician, Dr. George Nishopoulos, Dr. Nick, knew. The staff at Graceland, the cooks and the maids and the security guards, they all knew. Elvis was drowning, and nobody knew how to save him. But there was one man who controlled everything. One man who had controlled Elvis's career, his money, his image, his entire life for over 2 decades, Colonel Tom Parker. Parker wasn't even a real colonel. He was an illegal immigrant from the Netherlands who had reinvented himself as a Southern showman. He had discovered Elvis when he was just a kid with a guitar and a dream, and he had turned that kid into the biggest star on planet Earth. But somewhere along the way, the partnership had become something darker, something more like ownership. By the summer of 1977, Parker had isolated Elvis almost completely. He controlled who could see him, who could speak to him, what projects he could take. When Elvis wanted to tour internationally, something that could have revitalized his career and his spirit, Parker refused. Why? Because Parker couldn't leave the country. His immigration status would have been exposed, so Elvis stayed trapped in America, trapped in Las Vegas residencies that drained him, trapped in Graceland, which had become less of a home and more of a beautiful prison. The people who loved Elvis watched him slip away, day by day, pound by pound, pill by pill, and they felt helpless. On August 16th, that helplessness would turn to horror. The night before Elvis died, he seemed almost normal, or at least normal for Elvis in 1977. He had a dental appointment scheduled for the next morning, routine work that required him to be relatively clear-headed. So he tried to rest. But rest never came easy for Elvis anymore. His mind raced, his body ached. Sleep was an enemy he had to battle with pills. Ginger Alden, his girlfriend, was with him that night. She was only 21 years old, young enough to be his daughter, and she was exhausted from the constant worry. Elvis's mood swung wildly. He'd be affectionate one moment, distant the next. He'd talk about the future, about marriage, about all the things they'd do together. Then he'd retreat into himself, lost in whatever demons were eating him alive. Around 4 a.m. on August 16th, Elvis couldn't sleep. He was restless, uncomfortable, frustrated. He called down to the kitchen for something to eat. Then he went back upstairs to his master bathroom, a private sanctuary where he often retreated to read, to think, to escape. Ginger fell asleep in the bedroom. Hours passed. The sun came up over Graceland, Fama. Brother Audrey. The staff began their morning routines. The groundskeepers tended the lawns. The cooks prepared food. Life at Graceland moved forward as it always did in that strange rhythm that surrounded Elvis, half royal court, half prison ward. But upstairs in that master bathroom, Elvis Presley was dying. Nobody knew. Not yet. Around 2 p.m., Ginger woke up. She realized Elvis still hadn't come back to bed. That wasn't completely unusual. He often lost track of time when he was reading. but something felt wrong. The air felt wrong. She called out to him. No answer. She got up and walked to the bathroom door. It was slightly open. She pushed it wider, and there he was. Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, was face down on the floor in front of the toilet. His arms were tucked beneath him. His face was pressed against the plush carpet. He wasn't moving. Ginger screamed. Quick question. Have you ever had a secret that was eating you alive? Something you witnessed, something you knew, but you were too afraid to speak up? Let us know in the comments. The scream brought people running. Staff members rushed up the stairs. Among them was Al Strada, Elvis's personal aide, and Uncle Vester Presley, Elvis's uncle who worked security at Graceland. Vester was the first to reach Elvis. He was a former police officer, trained in emergency response. His instincts kicked in immediately. He dropped to his knees beside his nephew's body and felt for a pulse. Nothing. Elvis's skin was cool to the touch. His lips had a bluish tint. Vester's hands were shaking, but he knew what he had to do. He rolled Elvis onto his back. The body was heavy, difficult to move, and he began CPR. Chest compressions, hard and fast, the way he'd been trained. Call an ambulance, he shouted. And now someone ran to the phone. Vester kept pumping Elvis's chest. He tilted his head back, pinched his nose, breathed into his mouth. He was crying now, tears streaming down his face, but he didn't stop. He couldn't stop. Come on, Elvis, come on, son. Don't you do this. Don't you leave us. Don't you leave us. The other staff members stood frozen, watching in shock. This couldn't be happening, not to Elvis, not to their king. Minutes felt like hours. Then they heard footsteps, heavy, purposeful footsteps. Colonel Tom Parker had arrived. Parker walked into that bathroom like he owned it, because in his mind he did. He owned all of this. He owned Elvis, living or dead. He was a large man, barrel-chested, with a face that gave nothing away. He had built his entire life on control, on managing every detail, every story, every image. And right now, seeing Elvis Presley dead on the bathroom floor with his uncle performing CPR, Parker knew one thing with absolute certainty. This had to be controlled. Vester was still working on Elvis, still pumping his chest, still trying to force life back into a body that had already left. Sweat poured down his face. His arms were burning with exhaustion, but he wouldn't stop. He couldn't. A step back, Parker said. His voice was cold, flat. Vester didn't even look up. Ambulance is coming. I'm not stopping. I said step back. This time Parker's voice had an edge, a threat. Vester finally looked up at him. His face was wet with tears and sweat. His hands were still on Elvis's chest. He is my nephew, Tom. I'm trying to save him. Parker stared down at him. For a moment, the two men locked eyes. And in that moment, Vester saw something that chilled him to his core. Parker wasn't concerned about Elvis. He wasn't panicked or grieving or desperate. He was calculating. You need to shut your mouth, Parker said quietly. You hear me? You saw nothing. You know nothing. You know nothing. You don't talk to the paramedics. You don't talk to the police. You don't talk to anyone. Vester's hand stopped moving. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. What are you? Shut up. Parker stepped closer. This is bigger than you. Bigger than all of us. You start running your mouth about what you saw, what you think you know, and you'll destroy everything Elvis worked for. His legacy, his family, everything. The other staff members in the room had gone completely silent. They could feel the weight of Parker's words, the threat underneath them. Al Strada spoke up, his voice shaking. Colonel, you need to keep your mouth shut too, Parker snapped. All of you, not a word, not to anyone. The sound of sirens cut through the air. The ambulance was pulling up the long driveway to Graceland. Parker pointed at Vester. Get out of here. Go downstairs. I'll handle this. Vester looked down at Elvis one more time, his nephew, the little boy he'd watched grow up. The kid who used to play in the yard, who used to sing gospel songs with the family, who had become something so big and so tragic that it defied understanding. He wanted to keep trying. He wanted to fight, but he could see it was too late. Elvis was gone. His body was cool and still. His body was cool and still. The CPR wasn't bringing him back. Slowly, with legs that barely worked, Vester stood up. He backed away from the body, and he walked out of that bathroom carrying a weight he would never be able to put down. The paramedics rushed in. They took over. They tried their own resuscitation efforts, going through the motions, even though some of them could tell immediately it was hopeless. Elvis had been dead for hours. They loaded him onto a stretcher. They carried him down the stairs, the king of rock and roll covered in a sheet, his body lifeless and heavy. They put him in the ambulance and rushed him to Baptist Memorial Hospital. Colonel Tom Parker followed in his car, and before he left, he gathered the staff together in the foyer of Graceland. His eyes swept over each of them. Security guards, maids, cooks, people who had served Elvis for years. A nobody talks, he said again. A nobody. If anyone asks, you say he was alive when the ambulance arrived. You say we did everything we could. You don't mention pills. You don't mention how long he was in there. You don't mention anything. One of the maids, a woman named Nancy, started crying. But what really happened? Don't we owe it to Elvis to, You owe Elvis your silence, Parker said. That's what you owe him. His fans don't need to know the details. They need to remember him the way he was. The king, not this. He gestured vaguely toward the stairs, toward the bathroom where Elvis had died alone on the floor. Do you understand me? Slowly, one by one, they nodded. At the hospital, doctors officially pronounced Elvis Presley dead at 3:30 p.m. The news broke almost immediately. Within hours, the world knew. Fans flooded the streets outside Graceland. Thousands of them crying, praying, holding candles, but they didn't know the truth. They didn't know Elvis had been dead for hours before anyone found him. They didn't know that his uncle had tried desperately to save him with CPR. They didn't know that Colonel Tom Parker's first instinct wasn't grief, it was control. And for decades, because of Parker's threats and manipulation, nobody talked. The official story was clean, simple. Elvis Presley had a heart attack. He was rushed to the hospital. Doctors tried everything, but it was too late. The messy, ugly, complicated truth, that was buried. Uncle Vester Presley never recovered from that day. He tried to move on. He continued working security at Graceland for years afterward, guiding tours, answering questions from fans, smiling for photographs. But inside, he was haunted. He'd dream about it. That moment when his hands were on Elvis's chest, pumping, praying, begging God for a miracle that never came. He'd wake up in the middle of the night with his heart racing, feeling like he was back in that bathroom, feeling the weight of failure crushing him. And the worst part? The silence. Parker had made it clear. Talking meant consequences. For the Presley family, for Elvis's legacy, for everyone. So Vester stayed quiet. For years. But in 1997, 20 years after Elvis died, Vester was dying himself. Cancer was eating through him and he knew his time was short. He was 87 years old, and he couldn't take the secret to his grave. He agreed to an interview with a small Memphis newspaper. Just a local reporter, someone he trusted. And for the first time, he told the truth. He described finding Elvis on that bathroom floor. He described performing CPR with everything he had, trying to bring his nephew back. And he described Colonel Tom Parker walking in and telling him to shut his mouth. Tom didn't care about Elvis, Vester said in that interview, his voice weak but steady. And not in that moment. He cared about the business, about the money, about controlling the story. He looked at Elvis laying there dead, and all he saw was a problem to manage. The interview was explosive. Other people who had been at Graceland that day started coming forward too. Al Strada, some of the other staff members, they confirmed Vester's story. They talked about the fear they'd felt, the way Parker had intimidated them into silence. The truth started coming out in pieces. Books were written, documentaries were made. The official narrative of Elvis's death, that clean, simple story, began to crack. Medical records from the autopsy, which had been sealed for years, were eventually released. They showed massive amounts of prescription drugs in Elvis's system. Codeine, morphine, Valium, Quaaludes, 14 different drugs in total. The official cause of death was listed as cardiac arrhythmia, but everyone who looked at those records knew the truth. Elvis Presley had died from a drug overdose, plain and simple, and the person who had been prescribing those drugs, Dr. George Nishapoulos, was brought up on charges in 1980. He was accused of overprescribing medication to Elvis and other patients. The trial revealed horrifying numbers. In the last 7 months of Elvis's life, Dr. Nick had prescribed him over 10,000 doses of various medications. But here's the thing that nobody wanted to say out loud. Colonel Tom Parker had known. He had known Elvis was drowning in pills. He had known Dr. Nick was enabling it, and he had done nothing to stop it. Why? Because a medicated, compliant Elvis was easier to control than a healthy, independent one. Parker never faced charges, never faced accountability. He died in 1997, the same year Vester gave his interview, still maintaining that he had done everything for Elvis's benefit, that he had been a loyal manager, a father figure, a friend. But the people who had been there, who had witnessed what really happened, knew better. They knew Colonel Tom Parker had built an empire on the back of a kid from Tupelo, Mississippi, and when that kid died on a bathroom floor, Parker's first instinct wasn't to grieve, it was to protect the empire. Even if it meant silencing the man who tried to save him. Elvis Presley died alone. That's the truth that gets lost in all the mythology, all the conspiracy theories, all the debates about whether he's really buried at Graceland or whether he faked his death. The simple, heartbreaking truth is that Elvis died alone on a bathroom floor, and the people who should have protected him, the people who should have fought for him, either couldn't or wouldn't. Uncle Vester tried. In those final moments, with his hands on Elvis's chest and tears streaming down his face, Vester tried. But he was one man fighting against a machine that had been built around Elvis for decades, a machine that valued profit over people, control over compassion. And when that machine rolled over him, told him to shut up and sit down, he didn't have the power to fight back. Not then. But eventually, he found his voice. And because he did, because he refused to let the lie be the final word, we know what really happened. We know the truth. Elvis Presley wasn't just a victim of his own demons, his own addictions, his own pain. He was a victim of a system that consumed him, that used him up and spit him out, that treated him like a product instead of a human being. And when he was gone, that same system tried to rewrite history, to make his death cleaner, simpler, more palatable for the fans who loved him. But the fans deserved the truth, and so did Elvis. The king of rock and roll changed the world. He broke down barriers. He gave a voice to a generation. He made music that still moves people nearly 50 years after his death, but he paid for that legacy with his life. And the people around him, the people who should have saved him, failed. That's not an easy truth. It's not comfortable, but it's real. So here's my question for you. If you had been there that day, if you had seen what Uncle Vester saw, would you have stayed silent? Would you have protected the empire, or would you have fought for the truth, no matter the cost? Let me know in the comments. And unfortunately, they don't make men like Elvis Presley anymore.